10 years ago, my brother died. Kane was his name. He was killed on his way home one night in a car accident when I was just 7 years old. He was 20 at the time. Man, I miss him greatly. We were almost inseparable, doing just about everything together. Whenever we went out somewhere, I would most likely be by his side, following behind him like I was his little minion. Sometimes people would think I was his son. It feels like it was just yesterday when our family went to a local carnival and me and my brother wandered away from mom and dad, having fun in our own little world. We rode various rides, the ones I was tall enough for, and tried several mini games. My brother even managed to win me a medium-sized black stuffed wolf that had a gray fluffy tail and red marble eyes. It was from some game where you had to throw 3 balls into 3 separate holes from a distance. Every ball given was required to go into a hole to win anything. It was all or nothing. I remember it being a difficult game to win, so when my brother started a long winning streak, it attracted a crowd of highly impressed people. Some of those people included a middle-aged retired army vet who stood behind my brother acting as a hype man, and a group of girls that wanted to chat and snap a few pictures with him. He also got one of the girls to snap some pictures with just me, him, and my stuffed wolf. My brother, of course, introduced me to the girls, who knelt down, hugged me, and went on about how cute and adorable I was. I enjoyed the attention I got. Despite how good of a person my brother was to me, he was still human, which meant he had some flaws. The only thing I didn't like about my brother was his obsession with the occult. Starting in high school, he gained a fascination with black magic rituals, spells, and mysticism, things of that nature. He bought a lot of books about it, along with other typical magic materials, such as candles, incense, and sage, etc. Looking back, I think I may have even seen him come in the house with the Ouija board. Being raised in a religious household meant that it would have been all hell if my parents had seen him bringing that thing in the house. His obsession only got worse, to the point where that's all he wanted to practice. It was only a matter of time before his choice of style began to change. As you've already guessed, his wardrobe became a lot darker with black clothing. After a few weeks of consistently rocking his new style, our parents gradually caught on to what was happening. When they found out about his arsenal of dark arts in his room, an argument between him and my dad was provoked. Dad told him that this was a Christian household, and there was no way in hell he would allow him to practice that devilry under his roof. My brother, of course, shot back and tried to defend his ways. After a moment of them arguing back and forth, Mom got in the middle of the feud and tried to get both of them to tone it down. Dad eventually demanded that he got rid of all of those materials he bought. When my brother refused, Dad rushed up to his room with my brother following close behind him, trying hard to restrain Dad, but he wasn't fazed. Dad sternly made his way into my brother's room, right away peering under and behind things, searching for his black magic gear. Then he finally found it, lying in a brown oak wood box sitting in the closet. My brother begged Dad not to throw away his things. Dad wasn't hearing it. He wanted every trace of that stuff gone. Dad took the oak box to the backyard and threw it in the old, burned, and rusty barrel, setting a few feet from the back porch before dousing it with gasoline and throwing a lit match on top. My brother gave up trying to convince Dad after seeing that his stuff was now practically gone. Then he walked back into the house, face full of disappointment. I just sat in the kitchen, on Mom's lap, looking out at the flames through the patio door. Now you'd think after all that, my brother would have stopped those habits right then and there. Nope. After he was out of high school, he was about the same person. He never grew out of his fascination. It wasn't just a phase for my brother, as most people would assume. For a while, that's probably what my parents thought, because at that point in time, they didn't know that my brother was still practicing the dark arts under their roof. I just found out about it when I was 5 years old. One night I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling because I couldn't sleep. The house was almost completely silent. The only things I could hear was a fan going downstairs and the wind grinding against the house outside. The moonlight gleamed in through my window and shined on my bed sheets. I didn't know why I had trouble falling asleep, but part of it was because I had recently watched a horror film when I wasn't supposed to. My brother was the one who took part in me sneaking and watching it. As I lay there, I suddenly heard something coming from out in the hallway. It sounded like heavy breathing. Then I realized it was coming from my brother's room. As soon as I heard it, I froze, fear paralyzing me. At first, I assumed it was probably him snoring, or simply just how he breathed while sleeping. No, this breathing was almost distinctively inhuman, like an animal. The breathing got louder, which struck even more fear in my heart. After hearing that, I quickly pulled the cover over my head and listened, starting to breathe hard myself. After another while of laying there, the breathing still continued. So for whatever reason, I decided it was a good idea to hop out of my bed and head to my brother's room to see what was making the sound. I don't know what it was that gave me the courage to do that. I slowly crept out of my room and made my way down the dark hallway to my brother's room. His door appeared to be slightly cracked. My heart pounded in my chest as I got closer to the door. When I reached it, I creaked the door open and peered inside the room, jaws dropping to the floor. What I was seeing couldn't be real. It just couldn't be. For a moment, I entertained the idea that I was just having a nightmare. Wishful thinking, of course. My brother was sitting on the floor, beside his bed, legs crossed Indian style. His arms were out in front of him and his hands were turned with his palms facing upward. He was just sitting there, doing nothing but staring off into space. But what freaked me out the most was his eyes. They were egg white and free of a pupil and iris. I could see blackened veins sprouting from the edges and stopping where his pupils and irises should have been. His body was as stiff as a statue, and his facial expression was just dead. No frown, no fear, no smiles. Not even an evil smile, as I kind of expected to see at any given moment. Not a trace of emotion could be seen. He clearly wasn't there, as if he was possessed or something. After moments of staring at my brother, I saw something else. It was a small, black, mystic whirlpool of smoke, stirring in the air behind him. The whirlpool of smoke transformed into a small cloud. It began to expand into a bigger size, before finally taking the shape of what appeared to be the head of a creature of some sort. Its glowing green eyes is the first thing that stood out. When it finished shifting into its full form, it had a snout that resembled that of a dog or a wolf. I could see two black and misty pointed ears at the back of its head. Looking back, it may have actually been a goat or bull, because I also remember seeing two horns. That did it. The sight had caused me to piss my pajamas. I was so shocked that I'd forgotten about the loud breathing for a minute, but when my awareness of it had resurfaced, I soon realized it was coming from the mystic being levitating above my brother, who was still locked in his trance. The breathing got louder upon the summoning of whatever that thing was. In fact, it didn't even slightly sound like a human anymore. It was beastly, loud enough to the point to where I was sure Mom and Dad had to have been hearing it in their room by now. But I heard no one rushing from the other side of the house, coming to see what was going on. No one ever did. For the next 2 years, I would hear that same heavy breathing every night off and on, only to sneak out of my bed and see the same mystic monster over my brother while he was sitting on the floor, lost in his unknown world. Mom and Dad never found out about my brother's nightly ritual. I was the only person with knowledge of it. I never told him because, well, he was my brother. I knew the second our parents found out about that, he'd be in trouble for sure, or possibly kicked out. I didn't want to see him go, so I kept it to myself all that time. But it came with consequences. I started having nightmares after the first night. They got so bad and frequent that I slept with my parents a lot of nights. But it didn't stop me from hearing the breathing all the way on the other side of the house. It was surprising to me that Mom and Dad slept through it every time, not hearing a note of it. Even when they woke up in the middle of the night to use the restroom or go downstairs for a glass of water, they were still unaware of the sound. They tried to ask me what it was that was bothering me and causing the nightmares, but most of the time I just told them I didn't know. I wanted to be as far away from that thing that came to visit my brother every night. After a while, they started making me sleep in my old bed again, which of course I didn't like, but I eventually found a way to adapt to the situation. I didn't necessarily get used to something like that. I just found a way to get through it. I was very young, but after seeing that, it didn't take being older to know that something wasn't right. Now I'm 17 and on my way out of high school to start college. Soon I'll be able to get out of this town and leave some of the painful memories behind. It's not that I don't like my life. I actually love the people I wake up to every day, my family. I love my 10-year-old sister Haley to death. He was born 3 years after my brother had left us. And my parents, it's just my brother. It's been a long 10 years here without him, all the way up until he died. He's been by my side since I was born. It kills me to wake up every day and he's not here. I sat at my computer looking at a picture of me and my brother that I had sitting on my stand. The picture those girls took of us all those years ago at the carnival. My brother had me on his shoulders, legs dangling down over his chest. He had a cool and relaxed smile on his face while balancing me. His brown hair extended down past my ears and slightly covered his pale face. He was wearing one of his black outfits that day. My smile looked a bit more energetic. I was holding that black stuffed wolf my brother had won for me, hugging it tightly. While looking at the picture, I saw a silver ring on my brother's finger. A ring my brother used to wear all the time. The details of the ring was almost impossible to see in the picture, but I could slightly remember what it looked like. The shape of the ring kind of resembled an animal's face with a snout, horns, and that's when I gasped. The thing that used to levitate in my brother's room. As a child, I frequently saw him wearing the ring a lot, but I didn't pay much attention to it. I never realized what it resembled. When I went to the desktop and clicked the internet app, quickly searching out bull or goat head ring, I scrolled down the page only to find that most of the links were irrelevant to my search. Most of them were either jewelry company sites of biology pages on all types of animals. But I did click on the link that caught my eye, Whispering Brotherhood Secret Society. As soon as the webpage opened, the first thing that I see is that same bull-headed beast staring back at me with green glowing eyes. Only this time it wasn't made of black smoke. I could clearly see the creature was a bull, or at least bull-like. Its features were fully visible. I could see its long, dingy-colored horns protruding from both sides of its head, its gray-colored skin and black silky fur. But this was obviously just a conceptual depiction. I doubt this is what the beast actually looks like. Scrolling down further allowed me to see the world of dark and weird wonders. The first thing I see is a hooded figure facing me. The hood and top half of the person's torso were the only things visible in the photo. There was nothing but blackness beneath the hood. It was impossible to know for sure whether there was a face under there or not. Based on the small amount of clothing I could see, it appeared the figure was wearing a robed outfit, silky. The fabric slightly shined from the very small light source in the room. Underneath the picture read, Whispering Brotherhood, followed by several paragraphs of nothing but weird and unintelligible symbols. What the hell? I mumbled. I may only know one language, but I was sure this wasn't a language any human spoke. Mixed in with many more symbols came more pictures that contained more anonymous figures. All of them wore silky black hooded robes. Not one face was revealed. Then I noticed that they all had the same piece of jewelry, a silver ring on their left hand. The photos weren't good enough quality to see exactly what the rings were, but I deemed it safe to assume that it was probably the same kind of ring my brother used to wear. That's when I started to worry. Was it possible that my brother had anything to do with this? My thoughts were interrupted when my mom walked into the room. She stood in the doorway smiling at me, arms folded. "Why did you gasp?" she asked, smiling, smile growing wider. I saw nothing. Just forget about it," I replied. I heartily clicked out of the browser page as my mom came walking towards me. She puts a hand on my shoulder and says, "Your father and I will be headed out soon, so make sure Haley takes her medicine and grabs her lunch out of the refrigerator before you guys leave." My parents started their jobs 2 hours earlier than Haley and I started school. They actually worked in the same building as social workers. At a child welfare agency, as it is where they met nearly 30 years ago. So it was my job to walk her to the bus stop every morning, which was a ways away from our home. The buses at Haley's school don't travel to our area. We live far out, almost away from the city, where the vegetation and wooded areas start to become prevalent. Due to this, we only have about 2 or 3 neighbors that we know in the area. Later, Haley and I were on our way to the bus stop. Mom and Dad had already left for their jobs earlier before we left, so Haley and I were making our way down what seemed like the endless road surrounded by hundreds if not thousands of trees that followed the concrete road to the end that we unfortunately couldn't see yet. Every now and then we would see or pass a house that was also drowning in vegetation. As we walked, I couldn't help but think about what I found on the internet before we left. That group with all the creepy guys in the hooded robes. Who were they? Was it a cult? If so, what was it all about? The only readable thing on the site was that I assumed to be the name of their group, Whispering Brotherhood, so I couldn't see any more information about their group besides that. But what I fear most was the possibility that my brother was somehow affiliated with this group. There's no way he could have been part of something like that all this time without his family knowing, right? I tried to convince myself, but then I thought about that being used to visit my brother again. I just knew that I had to have something to do with all of this, or maybe even the cause. As we made our way down the road, Haley began telling me about her ballet class. She let me know about the other girls in the class, friends she made, and all her recent accomplishments as a dancer. To me, this was one of the best parts about starting our days. After a moment, she cracked a half smile. She glanced ahead of us, then made a sudden stop. She was staring at something in front of us. I looked up to see what it was. It was a dark figure wearing all black clothing. It looked like he was also wearing a black hockey mask. He was about 30 feet away from us, just standing there with his hands behind his back. Haley and I stopped in our tracks. My heart began to race, gradually getting faster and longer. I stared at the figure. My heart began to race and gradually get faster the longer I stared at the figure. Ben, who is that? Haley asked nervously. I don't know, I stammered. The figure tilted his head and then began slowly creeping towards us. Haley reached over and began bear hugging me tightly. Ben, I'm scared, she cried. Dude, what are you doing? I told the figure, not knowing what to do. He kept coming. Stay the fuck away, I yelled. Still kept coming. I spun around, and he was about to walk the other way until I discovered that there was about 10 more guys wearing black hockey masks creeping up behind us. I realized at that moment that they had probably been behind us the whole time. Haley started crying. I turned the other way again and saw that the first guy was a little closer. Who are you people? I screamed. Stay away. The guy ahead of me brought his hands from behind his back. That's when I saw it. The silver ring on his left hand. Snout, horns, bull. Right then and there, I picked up Haley, holding her tightly in my arms and spun around, getting ready to haul ass. But I was surprised by the other dark figures who had kept very close to me, to the point to where they were only a few inches away. Haley screamed and I felt a blow hit my head, then everything went black. When I gained consciousness again, I opened my eyes and didn't know where I was. The place I was in was nearly pitch black, with a few streams of light leaking in from the old dingy windows near the roof of the building. Wherever I was also seemed to be dusty as hell. My constant sneezing was the biggest indicator of this. The place also smelled rusty and old. I could tell that the building was most likely ragged and abandoned. I soon realized that my legs were strapped tightly to the legs of a chair I was in. My arms were strapped to the armrest of the chair. I struggled for a bit, attempting to break free, with no luck. Hello? I shouted. Ben! I heard Haley cry from somewhere in the building. Where are you? I asked. I don't know, she said. Get us out of here. I can't, I'm strapped down, I explained. I heard some footsteps near me, then several more throughout the building. My heart began to race again as I heard the person near me trotting around, a part of me expecting to be whacked upside the head again. But it sounded like they just walked past me. Someone lit a match just a few feet ahead of me. The flame floating in the darkness lit a candle, lighting up a small area and finally allowing me to lay eyes on someone else other than a black void occupied by a few thin streams of light. I could see one of the black hockey mask figures standing next to a wooden table, holding the match and lighting several other candles held by a brass candle holder. I heard someone else light a match. I glanced over and saw another masked figure lighting more candles, then another and another. one after that. It seemed like the entire area was filled with these masked men lighting candles. Wasn't long before just about the whole interior of the building was fully visible. I could see the silver rings on their left hands. Was this them? The Whispering Brotherhood? At this point, you'd think it was safe to assume they were, but their appearance kept me skeptical, only because their sight heavily implied that they were a bunch of stereotypical cult members that wore hooded robes. So, what exactly was going on here? Why didn't they match with what I saw on their site? As soon as enough light had traveled through the building, me and Haley's eyes met. "Ben!" she yelled. "Haley!" I shouted. A few of the figures turned and glanced at us, then continued lighting candles. Haley was on the other side of the building, strapped down in a steel chair in the same manner as I was. She looked frightened and confused, as if she'd explode if any of the figures came a step closer to her. One of the figures had a powdery substance in his hands, which they used to make a giant circle in the middle of the floor. Then someone behind me pushed my chair so I'd be closer to it. "What are you gonna do to him?" Haley cried. No one answered. Moments later, another figure swooped in. But this one didn't look like the rest. This one did look your stereotypical cult member, rocking the black hood robe with nothing but blackness beneath the hood. This one must have been the leader. Despite being closer than ever to the figure now, I still couldn't even see a glimpse of the face beneath the hood. But I still didn't get why the sight made it seem like all the members looked like this. The other hockey mask figures respectively moved and gave way to the guy before moving towards me and lining up around the big circle. All clasped their hands in a praying position. The robed figures stepped between the circle of shadow goalies and headed straight towards me. Haley started to scream again, but was abruptly silenced. That couldn't be good. "Well, what the fuck did you guys do to her?" I shouted. Upon saying this, a robed figure drew a sword-like dagger and drove it into my thigh. I yelled out in pain as blood erupted from the wound and cascaded down my leg. I could hear it splashing the ground beneath me. "Dude, what the hell?" I shouted again, staring up at the black void beneath the hood. "Your aggression won't be accepted here," the robed figure answered, slowly removing the hood from over its head. His voice sounded quite normal, not dreadful or hostile, as I would have expected. When his hood came all the way down, his appearance was revealed. It was an old, middle-aged man. He was partially bald, the only hair being the great moderate strings that lay on both sides of his shiny head. He also had a full gray beard that extended down a little past his neck. He looked and sounded like anyone's grandpa, like anyone you'd see out in public and wouldn't bat an eye, but most weirdos appear that way. The man pulled the dagger out of my leg. I winced in pain as he did. Then he knelt down in front of me and looked into my eyes. "He made his choice," the man said. "Kane made his choice." Dread washed over my face. "What? But you knew my brother?" I asked. He nodded his head. "Very. You see, the rest of us, Kane was free of mental shackles. His mind was open and free. I respect the value that, as that is what our brotherhood is mainly about. Your brother was a good guy, but his betrayal was unforgivable," the man said. "He became so open-minded that he thought he could leave us." I thought about what he said for a second. "Betrayal?" I said, looking confused. "Yes, just like any other, this brotherhood has rules. One of those rules are that once you're in, you're never out," the man explained. "And," I said, "attempting to leave the brotherhood comes with dire consequences. When joining, it is made very clear that once you join, you are in it for life. But if a member decides they want to leave, we ourselves won't try and stop them. We leave that to the animal," he said with a slight grin. "The animal? The animal doesn't like members breaking the rules, let alone the oath. Your brother tried to abandon us, which is breaking the oath. He suddenly decided that this life wasn't for him anymore. When members break the oath, the animal makes them pay with their life," the man continued, now holding a full grin. "You guys killed my brother?" I asked, eyes tearing up. "Oh no, your brother did it to himself. As I've said, he made the choice to join and leave, knowing well what the possible outcomes were," the man replied. "Okay, why the hell am I here then?" I snapped. When a member leaves, they must be replaced. When we then turn to the male sibling that comes after the discarded member when they mature, which is typically around 16 or 17 years of age, he explained. No, there's no way I'm joining your circle of masked freaks, I exclaimed. I'm afraid you have no choice. I'm pretty sure you wouldn't want to join your brother now, would you? The man snickered, still grinning. I just stared at him angrily. Now let's get started with the recruitment process, shall we? He said, turning around. Assume the position. After he shouted this, the hockey mask figures standing around the circle sat down and crossed their legs Indian style, holding their arms out in front of them with their palms up. The man said they were speaking to the animal. That's when I realized all those nights when my brother was sitting in his room with a mysterious being hovering over him, he was communicating with it, talking to that thing. The circle of figures started to chant something I couldn't quite understand. It started low, then got louder and longer. They chanted. The man spun back around, this time holding a gold cup in his left hand. I could see his silver ring now. In his right hand, he held the dagger raised in the air while creeping towards me. All I need is a little blood, then you'll be on your way, the man said, his expression now a little more crazed. No, please, I don't want to be part of your brotherhood, I yelled, trying my best to be louder than the chanting group. As he crept closer, I struggled in my seat, making several failed attempts of breaking free. The man got close and began slowly cutting the side of my neck with the blade. I screamed out in pain as I felt warm blood drizzle down the side of my neck. He held the gold cup beneath it in a small stream of crimson, watching it fill with delight. Ahead I could see a big whirlpool of black smoke begin to form in the middle of the circle, surrounded by the hockey mask figures. Another familiar image. This whirlpool was a whole lot larger than the one I used to see at my brother's room, though. The whirlpool rotated and started to expand, towering over everything in the building. I expected to be looking into the eyes of the great beast at the second. It was taking a lot longer than I remembered, but it seemed like the more of my blood that filled the cup, the more developed and recognizable the beast began. Out of nowhere, the man's dagger flew out of his hand and went into his own chest, puncturing his heart. He fell to his knees with his blood dripping, mouth wide open in disbelief. He stared at me for a second, coughing and choking on his own blood. I could see a darkened stain forming on the chest around his robe. After a few seconds, he finally dropped on his stomach. With a loud thud, he dropped the cup and spilled all the blood he collected from me. After this, the chanting came to an abrupt stop and the smoky whirlpool began to slowly shrink. All the masked figures turned and started staring at their dead master lying dead on the ground. Then they focused on me. The way they stared at me implied they weren't happy, as if they were blaming me for what happened to the bastard, when I was in fact just as surprised as they were. How the hell did that just happen? The dagger just hovered in the air out of nowhere and just darted the old fuck like an arrow. The figure stood up and started running at me, my heart pounding as I began to anticipate the worst. But they all stopped when they saw the dagger exit the man's chest and start levitating mid-air. My jaw dropped. The dagger raced at the small group and dove into the neck of a guy standing at the front. The guy's neck started bleeding and then he fell to the floor as a pool of blood started to form around his body. The rest of them slowly backed away, oblivious to what was going on. Then suddenly necks started to snap. I could see their necks bend in discomfort and freakishly unnatural angles, with loud and very painful sounding pops and cracks. This caused many of them to panic and start running away in different directions. But running did little to help them. One guy was really close to making it out of the exit door, but both of his legs were instantly snapped in half. He yelled at the top of his lungs as his legs were so twisted and distorted that he could see the back of his heels at point blank. Then his head was forcefully twisted until his face was pointing backwards. Another guy, not too far away, was in the middle of hopping over a crate close by when his head was just exploded in a bloody outburst before he could even make it over it. His brain matter and skull fragments splattered across the room, along with some of the blood that was erupting from his now headless body. I could see his headless corpse drop on the top of the crate, still pumping out gallons of blood. I heard some masculine screams coming from above me. I glanced up and saw two of the figures floating in the air, Both of their bodies were just simultaneously pulled apart and separated in two. All their blood and internal organs rained down on the pile of crates sitting beneath them. Soon the entire room was filled with screams and cries of these men being ripped apart and brutally murdered by whatever invisible force that was present in the room. "What the hell is happening?" I yelled, cringing from the sight and the sounds of bone being broken and flesh ripping. I honestly began to think that Haley and I were going to be next. At that moment, I truly thought I was fucked. I closed my eyes and looked away from what was happening in front of me. I had my heart racing in my chest. Was I just seconds from being nothing but mangled remains like these men? My thoughts were interrupted by coughing and choking that sounded like it was just a few feet away from me. I glanced up and opened my eyes. In front of me was one of the masked figures crawling on the floor towards me, with his bottom half missing. His upper internal organs left behind a bloody trail of guts and slope. As he came closer, I was shaking. When he reached me, he took both of his hands and attempted to crawl on me. I tried to wiggle him off, but the grip was a little too strong. "Get the hell off of me," I stuttered, still trembling in fear. He stopped and stared at me. I stared back, not knowing what to expect at this point. His blue eyes exploded in his head, leaving nothing but dark and bloody eye sockets. I could feel some blood droplets splash on my face. Streams of blood ran out of his eye holes of his mask. I screamed, not being able to easily shake him off of me. It took a moment for me to realize that the building was completely silent now. I glanced around the building and observed the aftermath of the carnage, and that had just taken place. The entire area was smothered in nothing but blood, organs, and disfigured corpse. I also gagged at the sight. I suddenly felt the zip ties around my ankles and wrists get looser. Then I heard them snap. I looked down to see that the zip ties around my wrists were cut in half. My arms were free now. The same with my legs. I just couldn't believe it. After all this, I was finally free. I jumped up and right away went over to where Haley was. She was knocked unconscious, head slouching over her right shoulder. I was so thankful she wasn't awake to see what had happened. Kneeling down, I gently shook her. "Haley," I whispered, "we're gonna get out of here." She didn't budge. She must have been in a deep sleep. I looked at the zip ties and found that hers had also been snapped. I lifted her out of the chair and held her in my arms, hugging her tightly. Just when I was about to head for the exit, I heard a loud thump behind me. With my heart starting to race again, I spun around and saw a whirlpool of black smoke rotating in the middle of the circle. I was about to run, but when I saw that it wasn't the animal, I stopped. It was an oak wood box. I made my way over to the box and opened it, still holding Haley. When I saw what was inside, my heart sank. A black stuffed wolf with the gray tail and the red marble eyes. My eyes started to fill with tears. Then a very happy smile swept across my face.